Have you ever had an idea for a physical product that you just knew had the potential to change the world? Maybe it was something you dreamt up in your garage or a solution to a problem you encountered in your daily life. Whatever it was, you knew it was a winner. If only you can turn that idea into something. You are not alone. Countless entrepreneurs and innovators have stood exactly where you stand, filled with passion and drive, but unsure of where to begin. And that's where the Builder Circle comes in.
My name is Sera Egeman, and I'm a mechanical engineer, hardware enthusiast, and hardware mentor. I've had the privilege of working with numerous hardware companies that are passionate about solving some of the biggest challenges in the world. And I will be your host as we explore the exciting and complex world of physical product development. The opinions and information shared on this podcast are for informational purposes only. We always recommend that you seek professional advice before taking any action related to your business or personal ventures. Welcome to this episode of the Builder Circle. Today, we're going to dive deep into the world of global trade for hardware startups. This is a topic that has been front of mind for a lot of us. I have Gabrielle Griffith, who's a global trade compliance expert, and what you're going to get out of this experience is the following. So we're going to talk about the fundamentals of tariffs, HTS codes, and why getting your classification right is critical. This episode is really for anyone that's doing hardware globally and wants to learn about export and import. So the second thing you'll learn is how country of origin and substantial transformation impact your duty rates and supply chain decisions, the role of free trade agreements and how they can and can't help you reduce costs. And then we're going to tackle common misconceptions about tariffs that can get companies into trouble and practical strategies and real world stories to help you avoid costly mistakes and navigate the complexity of international trade. So you should definitely consider grabbing a pen and paper because this episode is packed with actionable insights for anyone building and shipping hardware. As always, all of this is on an informational basis only and does not constitute as professional advice. So please do seek that out separately. And I hope that the episode at least is a good information starter so that you can go into your hardware with more confidence. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Builder Circle. Today, I am graced by the presence of Gabrielle Griffith, who is incredible. And we're going to be talking about tariffs and how to deal with that as for hardware startups. Just to give a little bit of background on her and the company. So BPE Global is the company that she is the director of and is a global trade compliance consulting firm. BPE Global is focused on creating innovative and efficient strategies tailored to each client's needs. BPE Global supports a wide range of industries and company sizes, including aerospace, defense, healthcare, consumer hardware, biotech, and telecommunications. Gabrielle brings 20 years of global trade compliance experience to help clients navigate the complexities of international trade. Having worked across public, private, and government sectors, Gabrielle understands the challenges an organization faces from multiple facets. Gabrielle advises a client base ranging from law to venture capital firms to importers and exporters of all sizes. I'm so happy to have you on, Gabrielle. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is long overdue, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I know. I just like context for the listeners. A lot of people always ask me how I find my guests, and this was honestly pretty serendipitous because I was dealing with understanding the trade implications for a lot of my startup clients. I ended up going to really any type of panel that I could find online of people that knew more than me. And Instrumental had this incredible panel that Gabrielle was on, and she just blew me away. It was just like the level of tact and information and the delivery. It was just like, I was just like, I need to have her on the show. So here we are.
Blush.
And yeah, so I guess, Gabrielle, to get us started, could we go through some basic definitions so that, because we're going to be referring to them throughout the show, so I feel like we should just get them from the beginning. Would you do us the honors and go through these basic concepts that we will run into a lot?
Yeah, I think the umbrella of trade compliance is very broad. Obviously, like in the setup of our company portfolio, we do import, export, sanctions, but whittling it down to today's discussion, specifically surrounding tariffs, I'd say it's like a four-corner square where you're going to hear me talk about HTS codes. You're going to hear me talk about duty. You're going to hear me talk about country of origin. And you're going to hear me talk about free trade agreements. So an HTS code stands for the Harmonized Tariff Schedule Code, HTS. HTS is the United States' acronym for the Harmonized Schedule Code. So HTS, the Harmonized Schedule, is a nomenclature of tariff numbers, 10-digit tariff numbers here in the United States. I'm a licensed customs broker. When I got my license many months ago, you take this test, now electronically. When I took it, you did not. Print it out. I don't know if this is going to be on video, but I'm holding my arms pretty much my entire wingspan, and I'm 6 feet tall. So it is, when printed out, it is a very large nomenclature of tariff numbers. It is set forth by the World Customs Organization as the Harmonized Schedule. Believe it or not, there are many meetings and task forces that meet frequently to look at these codes. The first 6 digits of this 10-digit code are standardized more or less globally, and the last 4 digits are assigned at a US level. So it dictates that tariff number assigns or indicates, number one, what the general rate of duty is, and we're going to talk about duty in a moment. Number 2, it designates whether that tariff code is subject to free trade agreements. So going back to my square, it's truly the root of everything. And then number 3, and it is the designation of when we see things like ad valorem tariffs, or basically tariff news in the news, when you see the China tariffs roll out, the fentanyl tariffs roll out, everything maps back to your tariff code. So getting that tariff code correct is absolutely critical. And we're going to talk about that because I see a lot of clients, and when I audit, a lot of people just pick and choose. They're like, oh, there's a list of excluded tariff codes. That one kind of looks like my number. No, there are very specific rules, and I'm happy to further get into them on how certain tariff codes are assigned. Certain parts and components cannot be assigned as a part of a finished good. It's a very complex designation process, and it's really cool to see a lot of the AI solutions out there right now working to get better at designating these codes. We still haven't seen perfection, but we're seeing a lot of really great AI solutions to map that tariff code. HTS code, for the purposes of this conversation, I would say will be synonymous to tariff code. You hear tariffs, your HTS code, aka also classification, is synonymous. All of those are synonymous terms. The duty, which I mentioned, is the hot word. I never thought I'd talk about duty so much in my career, but here we are. And so the general rate of duty, and duty is like a tax, right? It is in a very simplified way, it is dictated at a political level to encourage or discourage trade around the world. And when we're talking about duty specifically on the inbound, so imported items into the United States, I think I heard a statistic once upon a time that was like the average duty rate, general rate of duty, is 2.5% to 3%. I think actually I heard it more recently around 4%. So some items like tennis shoes are hugely dutied items, watches, clocks. Generally, historically, things like electronics have been very low duty, if not duty-free items. And again, there's a lot of my clients were like, oh, it's so subjective. There is so much lobbying and so much politicizing that is in the back end of designating those general rates of duty. Then that duty becomes the lever of how all of these kind of reactions to various global issues are. So we saw in the President Trump's first round of presidency, when he rolled out the Section 301, Section 232, the rationale of those, they're referred to duty, is also referred to as tariffs in the news, which is confusing because there's the tariff code. So when we're talking about the tariffs and the duty, the tariffs that were rolled out by 232, 301 were, the rationale was that it was in support of national security. Because, for example, 232 is on steel and aluminum, and the fact that if the United States can't manufacture steel and aluminum, they're going to jack up the duty on steel and aluminum so that it encourages U.S. domestic production. Because in a time of war, if the U.S. is too reliant on partners, for steel and aluminum, that would put the United States at a disadvantage. So that's the rationale, again, at a very high level.
Yeah.
301 was more about intellectual property and we're going to talk about that as well, which is protecting it, because it first rolled out the 301 on electronic goods, on technology. And it was about, and it was specifically targeted towards items coming out of China, because it was, again, very distilled, or very simplified. But the Section 301 was to protect jacking up the tariffs on the inbound side to discourage production in China, because we're giving China recipes to further their technological advancement that they can perhaps either grow larger than the United States or then therefore pass to more military end use and nefarious purposes. That was considered a threat to national security. And now we've seen an extension of that in President Trump's second presidency, with just further tariffs or further, again, pulling on that lever of duties and tariffs to address the fentanyl crisis with the 20% on Canada, Mexico, China. We've seen last week with the liberation tariffs. So this has become very much a tool that, in an unprecedented way, that there's obviously two sides to every argument and discussion surrounding this. But I always remind, especially in the first round, my clients on the why these tariffs are happening. Like, it is protectionist. You can get me going on tariffs and do I really think they're necessary? But they are, the rationale is, it makes sense. And when my clients hear that, like steel, aluminum, the national security piece, they're like, okay, it helps to have context that this isn't just someone beating their chest and saying tit for tat what we see in the news that's so sensationalized. And obviously we didn't see a reduction of duties in the Biden-Harris administration. So that, and we'll get into that, but at the end of the day, duties are taxes, and they are layered and complex, and they encourage growth in the United States and global trade. And I know we're still in basic definitions, so I've gone completely sideways already, but
no worries.
So again, on my little box or circle or whatever, the 4 points are the HTS codes, the duty rate, and then the country of origin. And those three things are, in the era of tariffs and importation, are like the three peas in a pod, right? Like the country of origin of your item, the pairing of the tariff code and the country of origin dictates your duty. So if you're like mapping this out as a formula, it's like X plus Y equals Z, like then or whatever. It's really interesting because we see the country of origin be often misunderstood. The country of origins of the root of companies saying, oh, okay, back to our equation, like if X plus Y equals Z and Z is now I'm subject to Section 301, then I'm going to change one of those variables and move my Chinese originating tariff code to Taiwan and therefore not be subject to Section 301. And there's so much more complexity behind that, right? The country of origin dictates, number one, again, that duty rate, which duty rate you're going to be subject to in this era of these layered, complex tariff rates, aka duties. And the country of origin also dictates, the fourth point, the FTA that you might be subject to. So FTA is a free trade agreement. An example of that, more in the consumer hardware space, is the USMCA, aka NAFTA 2.0, which is the free trade agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico. There are many more trade agreements, but that is the big one that I see consumer hardware clients leveraging.
I think all of this is really important. And I think understanding the depth of them and the where they come from is important for people to wrap their heads around, because these are not things that engineers nor hardware people tend to think too much about. It's usually like the supply chain people with their heads on fire in the next room, and most of the engineers and founders just figure it out, please.
Yeah.
I think it's really valuable to understand that. And to summarize, the HTS codes are really about understanding and defining what types of goods you are buying and what duties they will be subject to. And they're they have codes that are attached to it, and there are really stringent definitions, and there's more complexity to that. And this is basically a tool for you to look at your bill of materials, understand what HTS code they correspond to, and maybe have some specialists help to determine what that is, and then do your strategy according to that. And then when we're talking about country of origin, we're going to slightly dive into substantial transformation, because I think that also affects that.
And then, yeah, free trade agreement. I think the most common one that the U.S. and a lot of companies use is the one between Canada and Mexico. So definitely worth pointing out.
Yeah.
I guess you already hit a lot of the stuff that I wanted to ask you about. So I'll dive right into that substantial transformation. What does this mean and why is it important? And for those who don't know what substantial transformation even is tied to, could you, in your square, tell them which one it affects?
Yeah, I think if you're okay with it, I want to make this really specific to more the value of our discussion towards engineers, because
Yeah.
before we go into substantial transformation, I'll start by defining substantial transformation. Then I'll say, I want to take a step back and talk more about that HTS code, because there's in the era of tariffs, from an engineer perspective, I think it's really important to understand that tariff code from a really strategic perspective. And again, this isn't new. This is something in practice we've always done. I've always worked with engineers in my past. I've been a consultant 9 years, but I was in-house in tech before that. And we work with engineers to help them understand, okay, your current product, your widget is a transmission device, and it's 8517.62. And then there's 3 sub breakouts there. So we talk about, number one, designating the actual tariff code, looking at those implications that I talked about. Okay, this is the tariff code. We're manufacturing in China, or manufacturing in Thailand. What does that mean from a company standpoint? And if it's looking like it's, from a company standpoint, going to result in 145% tariffs, then maybe it's time to have a really strategic engineering discussion on some engineering we can do to the product. Maybe it's a patch, maybe it's an addition of something, maybe it's so before you start thinking from in the supply chain, I feel like I'm backwards now on the camera, but like A to Z, you want to think about the most minimal impact. Think about the problem with the least lift, I want to say.
Yeah.
Kind of order of operations. Is my tariff code correct? And if we're looking at a tariff code that is really impactful from the duty hit to my company, then are there other tariff codes that we can consider? Are there any modifications or engineering we can do on our existing product to make it different? Like, what can we change easily with what we have that might help?
Yeah, and I think
always,
I think they're also calling this tariff engineering. I've heard it.
Yeah.
It's coming up in all conversations nowadays.
And it's funny because everyone's, oh, it's so new. And I'm like, no, it's really not. It's been around for forever. It's just now engineers are listening to us. I've been banging on engineers' doors for 20 years, and they're like, go away. I don't want to talk to you. Like, I'm my engineer little world. But like with the 1.0 tariffs, with the Section 301 tariffs, that was when we really started to get in front of engineers. So we were, as an example, with one of my clients, I was working with them with their, I don't even know what the title, it was like a logistics person, I think, at high level, but a director or VP level, but not an engineer. So when we would work together to look at the hit of the Section 301 tariffs, I was asking really technical questions that were going back to the team, not really getting addressed. Weeks were going by. So this is 2018. Fast forward to years of really having these not really anchored, cemented answers on lock, and just lots of miscommunication. That individual left that company, and I had a call with their team of engineers one evening, and in 30 minutes, we like buttoned up and put a plan in place that we hadn't been able to put in place in years. Like, it was remarkable. So I can't stress enough the partnership of engineering and whoever of engineers are in and of themselves responsible for designating that code, but being open to that partnership to have those conversations, because engineers are at obviously the root of everything in terms of the tariff engineering, of thinking about the products from a strategic point of view. So that's my plug, and that's into engineers. If you didn't know how important you are already, obviously most of them I've worked with do, but those conversations. So now to substantial transformation. So again, back to this era of my supply chain is imploding. Can you change anything like with what you have in place? Because our general advice, it's like, just everybody chill. Just take a look. Since 1.0, our advice has just been get your tariff codes on lock, get your audit trail, maybe diversify a little bit, but everybody we have to calm down. We've seen just in how the swings, right? In just the past like few days have hit us. And I've been saying the same thing to all clients. We've had clients air tons of what should have been ocean via air. We've had clients who relax. So it's all a business decision. But again, get your tariff codes on lock. Look at what can be changed from a strategic tariff code standpoint. Substantial transformation, to bring it back to that, is what we consider when we think about reshoring or moving a supply chain or a portion of your supply chain. For example, if you are manufacturing your product entirely in China, maybe now you want to move your supply chain to manufacture in Thailand, but Thailand doesn't have PCBA capabilities at the threshold that China does. So you're still going to bring in your PCBA from China and enclose it in plastic in Thailand. And then in your mind, you might think that, okay, now it's going to be from Thailand. And that's wrong. So we want to do something, we want to think about things in the lens of substantial transformation. So what that means is that when you're thinking about moving a piece of your supply chain or a portion of it, make sure that the country of origin is going to change substantially, that your product's getting changed substantially. So my kind of overall example, I'll give you two examples. One is more consumer hardware specific. Think about a jigsaw puzzle. You buy a puzzle in a box and it's full of cardboard pieces. If you're making that in China and moving into Mexico or to Taiwan or wherever and making it into its flat puzzle, that is like minor assembly. That is not in the eyes of CBP, Customs and Border Protection, who is ultimately on our borders enforcing all of these importations. In their eye, that does not constitute a substantial transformation. The intent of the design and manufacture in China was a puzzle. It doesn't emerge, I think, in the customs eyes, they call it substantial transformation when an article emerges with a new name, character, or use. So you really have to think about it in that lens. So in that example, the puzzle does not emerge with a new name, character, or use. That's a really obvious example. So the second example is more like consumer hardware. We see batteries and PCBAs are like the big in substantial transformation, because those are really two subcomponents that are challenging to get at the quality that consumer hardware manufacturers and engineers are able to source from China. So you're going to hear me talk about customs rulings, perhaps. That's a public database of CBP, Customs and Border Protection. I don't want to say opinions, they're rulings. So official determinations regarding certain products, tariff codes, substantial transformation. So as a company, you can go to customs and submit a ruling and say, hey, here's my supply chain or here's my tariff code. This is why I think this. And then customs says yay or nay. And some of my clients like that concept. In practice, most people, everyone I've ever met within my industry is actually pretty anti going for these binding rulings. Number one, they're public. You can get them blacked out so you don't know your company name. But number two, and most importantly, they're binding. So you might get an unfavorable determination, then you're stuck. Yeah. And as an importer, you're just expected to do your due diligence. That's Customs and Border Protection's expectation of an importer, is that you do your due diligence. So how do you do your due diligence? One of the ways is you can cross-reference this database to say, okay, I'm manufacturing this device over in Taiwan, and here's my supply chain, and I think it substantially transforms, but let me go in this database and see if there's any other rulings that I can look at. And the database is called CROSS, CROSS. If you just Google CBP CROSS, and then just like search around, there's rulings back in there. I think they go back to the late 80s, if not early 90s. And Customs still very much references a PCBA ruling from, I think it's like the early 90s, which is wild. So and I've had scenarios with clients where their guns, and even when I was in-house, we had CBP question I think it was a free trade agreement and tariff classification, and we were able to we had done our diligence. We were able to substantiate our claim by citing several customs rulings. We were like, you guys, like, we thought about this because customs has ruled with that same logic in X, Y, and Z ruling. So that's like a piece of due diligence. So back to the batteries and PCBAs. In looking through these rulings, the trend that has been noticed is that you might have a major assembly of an item with a battery, for example, like a super complex automatic window shade. And that window shade might have a battery in it, but it is the fanciest window shade with hours and hundreds of hours of labor and cost. And that battery might be like 1%. At the end
Right.
of the day, customs would see that as a battery. So if that battery is from China, and even if you were manufacturing your fancy thing elsewhere, it's a battery. The essential character of that item is to be a battery. So that is one, just to like, if your product has a battery in it, really your country of origin is, it is rare for customs to view the country of origin as not the country of origin as the battery or the cell of that battery. And then the second, with the PCBA, we've seen customs rulings really view the country of origin as where, like, the PCB is assembled. Like, where's that SMT happening? Like, where is that? And if that's all happening in China, and then you're moving the brains of your operation to Mexico, and we're going to talk about the free trade agreement and the Mexico piece, because that is a whole quagmire down there. But we'll just use Taiwan for the simplicity of not adding a free trade agreement into the discussion at this point. But just think about, with the PCBA, if you can have that manufactured elsewhere, that's going to be more of a reliable or a stronger case for substantial transformation. So I want engineers to hear, like, when we think about substantial transformation, two things. One, in the eyes of customs, it is, does it emerge with a new name, character, or use? So if customs sees or questions you and you're manufacturing your whole subcomponents in China with the intent of sending it to Taiwan to get made into that puzzle, that's not going to pass muster. The battery, the PCBA, those are two, again, really big driving factors in consumer hardware or substantial transformation cases, that when they are in China, made in China, country of origin China, and shipped elsewhere, customs really pushes back on that. And I still can't think of one really nice scene that has passed muster on having that manufactured in China to be further manufactured elsewhere.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's a lot of information. Very important. Like, all of it is just, it's honestly so good to have it laid out this way. But just like for the simplicity's sake of the listeners, maybe I'm going to try to boil it down and you tell me if I'm boiling it down incorrectly. If, like, a company is at the crossroads of trying to make these strategic decisions about their design, either on the engineering side or the supply chain side of sourcing, and also asking them the question of what parts do we outsource where, because it's just like, it, as you said, as you pointed out, there's a subcomponent manufacturing, and then there's like the full assembly, and this like definition of substantial transformation of just, does the name change, does the function change, what are these? And so if someone's at the crossroads of making this decision, obviously, like, number one, maybe look at the HTS code, look at the countries that these are being made of, and like what tariff and duties they're actually exposed to. Maybe pop that into your techno-economic analysis and to make sure that it's actually a problem, because it might not be. And like, then you might not have to even think about this and waste time. But say it is, and you are at the point of deciding where it's maybe a PCBA is going to get manufactured and then put into a really big assembly where really it's going to change the entire name, and maybe that's fine. But like, to be able to make this, they could go to the CPB website, across, you said, and I'll link it, where they can look at like past rulings of similar items and what people got out of them. If they can't find anything, they could go through two paths of, they could maybe request a ruling, but then that's binding. So make sure you know what risks you're taking. If they're not going through the ruling, then it's basically going to, you probably want to work with a specialist maybe, or you still need to find a ruling that works out, because you might have to take a risk of, maybe you will have to pay the tariff, and it might not, like, it seems a little squishy, even though. So I think at the end of the day, this is what engineers hate, right? Like, I want to.
I'm in regulatory compliance. I like black and white. And I keep telling engineers, like, substantial transformation it's entirely subjective. It's like truly one of the only areas of our industry I can think of that is not defined in black and white. And we only pull from guidance. And I think you did a spot on job summarizing that.
Excellent. And maybe we can quickly talk about the like free trade agreement and what that means and when it comes to play.
Yeah. So when we bring the free trade agreement into play, and it's come into play big time, this is a perfect kind of segue out of the tariff code, tariff engineering, and country of origin and substantial transformation discussion, because this is the fourth corner where we've seen, and this conversation will be on the USMCA, so NAFTA 2.0, we saw companies and manufacturers reshore or open new facilities in Mexico. So Mexico obviously is under the free trade agreement which has a very concrete structure on how goods can qualify for that free trade agreement. And you can
Hmm.
qualify as a consumer, and especially in a consumer hardware standpoint, there's a few birds I'm noticed, like not noticing, but that companies leverage with that. And one is duty-free entry into the United States if you qualify for the free trade agreement, obviously. Two is a lot of the like TAA, like the agreement that there's a lot of opportunity in the United States with in the defense space, as well as Buy America Act, TAA. Mexico and Canada are considered advantageous locations to do this. We'll start with two then. So it is interesting because under qualifying for the trade agreement, there's kind of two main ways you can qualify for USMCA. And one is called the tariff ship rule, like shifting, like a car. And it is again, it's in that tariff schedule. It's in the beginning of that tariff schedule. And you basically have to assign, it goes back to your bond. So you're looking at the end tariff code that your item imported into the United States would be. So you're starting with that. And then you find that in the tariff shift schedule under the trade agreement. So first, if you Google USMCA agreement, it's in there somewhere. It's hundreds of pages long. So it'll say, for example, we'll go back to our transmission device. It'll say changes to 85.17.62.0090 from any other chapter in the schedule qualify. What that means in English is that you have to have whatever else you're importing into Mexico or Canada if you're manufacturing, but I'll say Mexico because that's obviously been where I've seen most of my consumer hardware clients manufacturing. If your subcomponents that you're importing into Mexico are 85.17.62.0050 or whatever other tariff code, the way that the tariff shift rule is written is like, it'll map out like this tariff code, your end game tariff code qualifies if shifted from any other tariff code in the schedule, or it'll say it only qualifies, but not if it's from one of these other tariff codes. So it sounds crazy to talk about. It's on a podcast without having a piece of paper in front of you. But that's like a very easy way or I won't say easy, but it's like a very simplistic way. But again, it comes back to you're only as good as your tariff codes. So you can qualify for that. And then you can also qualify. There's a few valuation methodologies under the USMCA that you can qualify. So one's the regional value content, and it is a formula that is there in black and white. So my engineers, we do love that, where we can start plugging in the value of the materials and originating from that territory, deducted by the values that are not originating over the total value, that kind of stuff. So there's rules around valuation. So again, these are both like very concrete ways we can qualify for a trade agreement. Oh, I remember my third point. Third point was marking, because I was talking about kind of the advantageous United States programs that you can get, the duty-free entry if you can qualify for USMCA, and then marking too, because is it enough to qualify like the rule of origin to say, okay, made in Mexico or product of Mexico or something like that. We're not marketing and labeling experts, but that is a third cog of the advantageousness of the USMCA.
Gotcha.
So back to qualifying under that agreement, to substantiate that agreement to say market as made in Mexico or made in Mexico, a product of, etc., and to qualify as duty free, it has to meet one of those criteria. Or back to our cross rulings databases, what we saw in like 1.0 tariffs was that a lot of items were qualifying for under the trade agreement, but not under the country of origin of the actual item. So we saw products so say your device is general rate of duty 2% if it's imported from Mexico into the United States. If you qualify it for the trade agreement, you're now looking at zero duty coming into the United States. If you are qualifying under the trade agreement with Chinese originating components, so let's go back to our battery or maybe the PCBA examples. So now you are bringing in a PCBA from China to Mexico. You're bringing in packaging from Thailand. You are doing the wiring and all the things in Mexico with screws and stuff from Mexico. So back to our qualifying for the USMCA, it might say something like, okay, a transmission device that has that PCBA in it it's going to be 8562 from any other heading qualifies for the USMCA. But at the end of the day, that PCV is from China. So for Section 301 purposes, that USMCA analysis is not applicable from a country of origin substantial transformation analysis, which is like basically blew up our brains. We kind of Trump 1.0. So we have seen from through the cross rulings, if you go in there and just search like USMCA Section 301, you'll see lots of rulings that provide a lot more background. So I obviously could talk about this all day long. So it's important before you are thinking about moving your supply chain back to that substantial transformation, just remembering that the methodology of a trade agreement is not applicable to CBP's take on all these extra tariffs. It's a different framework. Customs is very clear that they are different. So you might be duty free. So you might, instead of having that 2% on our hypothetical device, you've dropped out of the 2% under USMCA, but you haven't dropped out of the Section 301. So you're 25% on import now, plus the newest one's even more than that, but you're still considered a product of China.
Gotcha.
It's a quagmire for sure.
Wow. I think that's like stuff that's genuinely just not obvious to people. And it's really, it sometimes feels like a minefield of not knowing what to do. And I'm so glad we're talking about it.
Yeah.
I want to do a little sidestep to keep it maybe a little bit lighthearted. And because we've been talking about pretty difficult concepts. And I think that it's all really valuable. And I probably will put a disclaimer at the beginning of this to say, get a pen, get a paper.
Yeah.
You ready to sketch it out? Okay. So stepping into the common misconceptions, these are when people hear tariffs, they're like, ooh, time for me to be smart. And they can come up with these maybe strategies of finding a way or a loophole. So I just want to talk, I just wrote out some loopholes that people have come to me with. And I'm like, no, unfortunately, that doesn't work. So let's start with this one. And you basically answered this, but cool. Okay, China has this huge tariff on it. So what I'll do is I'll just ship my components to Canada and then I'll just have them shipped from Canada and no one will know the difference. And I'll be the smartest person in town and it'll be a tariff workaround. As we just talked, it's the country of origin doesn't change as it was born there. It didn't choose to be born there.
Yeah, no, I had a client engineer actually, and he was like, you're telling me, and this was years ago, it's probably like 2016, so it predates tariffs, that he was like, you're telling me everybody does this work? This is like speeding down the freeway. Everybody speeds, but it just sucks for the guy who gets caught. I was like, I'm in compliance, but if you want to look at it, sure. Like, you can go ahead and ship your goods to Canada. But don't forget that there are fines and penalties also. So it's not just as a business risk, we're just going to try that. And then worst case, we'll be caught at the border and have to back pay duties. No, there's like exponential fines and penalties if you're caught doing that. I wish I had this information. I think it's 3x the entered value of your shipment and then up to $20,000 or more than that. And not to mention, like, if you do more than one jail time down the line, there's plenty of court cases about that. So and we do see interesting cases in what we do and auditing where we're like, okay, that's an interesting life choice. You can only lay a horse to water.
Oh, totally. Fair. That's also good to know.
Yeah.
For anyone that's thinking of doing that, maybe don't.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a big one actually. Oh, my goods already shipped, so I'm fine. But it hasn't entered through the border though, right?
Yeah. We saw that one typically 2 weeks ago when the liberation tariffs were announced, because now that we're paused. So this is where, as an importer, we've always advocated for a partnership with your customs brokers, because a lot of these fluctuations, like when we are working with a company to set them up correctly in the traditional way of laying the foundation, making sure you're like got everything like good to go, making sure you know where your levers are. So when, it gets crazy, you can react quickly and appropriately. So to the goods being shipped, like that, a lot of these orders have, for the most part, they are effective a few days from the time they drop. It might be, if they're done according to the way they've historically been done, you get a runway. These are the parts and pieces that are going to get controlled. This is when they're going to get controlled. Give us your feedback. But my point is that like the way that the most recent, like the Liberation Day tariffs dropped, it was effective April 5th, like at 12:01 a.m. or whatever, it's going to apply, right? And then we saw obviously all the aftermath of that. But why that matters in terms of my goods are shipped on fine, the timestamps, if your goods are on the water, and this is really important to pay attention to, if your goods are on the water on their final leg of transit, you are, and like in that environment, you are good. So
okay.
not only, so it was, and that, so that question was like very specific to like those liberation, that like those 3 to 4 days, like after the liberation tariffs dropped, because we saw and we heard of many companies that reacted by saying, oh my God, we're going to air everything tonight. And it's, but if they're on the water or I think like I read certain companies were dumping, or I think it's a Chinese carrier was like dumping product like into the ocean. I don't know if you read that too, but it's one of those things where read the full orders or use chat to distill the orders appropriately. But the tariffs are, when we see those big hits, like on these waves of tariff duty augmentations coming out, it's usually something like goods entered as of April 5th are subject unless they were on the water on their final leg of transit. And that is really critical because, especially if you're in ocean shipping, because a lot of these carriers and freight, especially like in LCL as the container load environment, are consolidating unbeknownst to the importer. So this is where, going back to my point on have a really tight partnership with your customs broker. These are conversations ideally you want to have like when you're vetting them. Like, how do you react? What type of reporting do you do? Who can I call? How do I get this information to know before I'm like watching the news and sweating and so,
Actually, that's so good to know. I wasn't sure about where that line was drawn. So that's actually really important information.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting one. A lot of people beyond consumer electronic, also in consumer, have different types of payment schedules, which they sometimes associate with tariffs. I feel like this is a pretty common misconception where it's, we already paid for a portion of that part, so we'll just pay tariffs on the part that we didn't pay for. So one example would be you're buying equipment and usually you need to put down like a 30% deposit, and then you have a 60% at like factory acceptance and then maybe at site acceptance. And so it's like split in that way. But at the end of the day, when you're paying tariffs, it's the cost of, it's the like deemed value of whatever you're bringing in. So it's like the payment schedule and how much you paid and when it was paid before the tariff, I reckon don't matter. But I'm curious, is that correct?
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. It's something we've seen crop up a lot, even like prior to all this tariff crazy. That's a valuation question. And there's really specific rules around valuation. And what you just described is actually could be considered what's called an assist. And in the eyes of like Customs and Border Protection, assists are something, there's different methodologies, but one is, okay, so you provided like a tool or some sort of, you've paid for a tool to print. I'm trying to think of a really good example. And I know this is like worth an entire podcast on its own. I will just say to the listeners, if you're looking for like valuation advice, CBP's website has really good resources for self-surveying. I obviously would talk to an expert, but experts are busy and you might not have that budget or whatnot. But go to CBP's website. They have what's called informed compliance publications. And I can send this to you, Sarah, so you can post it in the notes. But
yeah, that'd be great.
There's one specific publication about valuation that addresses that type of scenario on how do you value your product. So I know I didn't exactly answer your question because you're correct. You don't get to back out from a tariff perspective. If anything, you might have more to declare than you thought you did if you have an assist. These are compounding additions to your landed cost. So it's important that you get your valuation right. So that's positive aside. But back to the tariff landed cost, truly like from the executive orders, especially in today's environment, what you can do to back out. I know one of your questions also was like looking at other mitigating factors and how to deal with these tariffs, but it's the U.S. origin, right? So in that executive order, we saw a provision for if your item has 20% or more U.S. origin content in it, you can deduct that from your landed cost. So there's a lot of valuation per that executive order. There's any U.S. origin components to think about. Another thing to think about from a valuation standpoint is a concept called first sale. So if you have a supply chain where, you're sourcing from company A and company A ships to company B and you're paying company B for that material to ship to you, there's a way to leverage the value of your imported item as that first sale from company A to company B,
I see.
which is at a lower amount. So there's ways to look at driving down the landed cost of your product under the valuation bucket, which I've said is its own podcast here for another day.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other kind of U.S. origin type of provisions where if you're importing into the United States, then re-exporting for like alteration or repair, then re-importing it, you can leverage. It's called Chapter 98 provision codes.
Yeah.
If you've previously imported a product that's re-exported and then it's re-imported for whatever reason, even if it's not from the US, there's another code under that Chapter 98 you can use to make sure you're not paying that duty. So it's just, again, about knowing your supply chain. Obviously, drawback is where if you import product and then re-export that product, you can draw back the duties that you deposited on first importation. And there's different sub methodologies within that, where if you're importing to manufacture to re-export, manufacturing drawbacks. So again, a different topic.
So it's like, just to, I guess, visualize the duty drawback program, because I think it is a really smart one. If there's like a company, say a startup, they get their stuff built in China, they ship it to the US, but they're actually selling to France. Like they can basically participate in said thing. Or would it have to be exporting back to the country of origin?
I might need you to repeat that one. So it's applicable to products that were entered into the United States and re-exported.
Yeah. So they
import into the US and go to France, then you can draw back the duties for the portion, or you would look at the value that exported to France and draw back those duties.
Got it. Okay, perfect. I actually have an interesting question for you. This has been brought up recently to me because a lot of companies, specifically deep tech, these like large hardware companies, I work with more deep tech, like large industrial grade rather than consumer, but I feel like most are applicable to all. There's this new business model called hardware as a service where companies get their, like they don't sell the hardware, they sell the service. Or they buy the service and don't buy the hardware. So say someone is going to buy equipment and that company has a hardware as a service business model and they gift the hardware to this company and you export it and import it into the United States, but then you're paying for the service on a monthly basis. How does that get tariffed? Is the valuation made on the hardware itself, or is it the business?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So we are familiar with this. So in that model, we've seen a few different shakeouts, and there's a lot of kind of considerations in that model. Ultimately, the tariff is paid by the importer of record. So in that scenario, who would be the importer of record? Because it's on tangible items, right? In that situation, it's okay, who's the responsible party? So who would be the importer of record in that scenario that you just mentioned?
I think that's a fair question. For the purpose of this, let's say the importer is an American company that's actually like buying the service, going to use the hardware. It's not the company that's sending it.
Yeah. It would be on that company to pay tariff, and you're talking about more the valuation of the item.
Yeah. Do they pay tariff on if it's the hardware is a gift?
So I want to make sure I'm understanding this scenario correctly. So you're saying the hardware is gifted, therefore it's $0 value to that company that's importing it.
Yeah, but they get like an annual payment of $45,000 for the usage of this like industrial machine or something like that.
Yeah. So this is an intersection of back to that assist situation I mentioned. Also, in the eyes of customs, nothing should be duty free, nothing should be $0 value.
Sure.
And the way this works out operationally, where there's two ways to do it, and one is a better way to do it, and companies don't like it, but it's way easier. Finance prefers it. So the first is you declare that 43,000 or whatever number, that annual amount, one time, and you pay duty on that hardware one time. And then every shipment from there is cites that. And again, going back to your broker, you cite it back. Or you portion it out on the shipment. And you can say if it's like gifted or whatever, there's a statement you can put on the invoice, like value for customs purposes only. We haven't talked about Incoterm because a lot of my clients, I see this for the scenario you're describing it. I see it as samples. I see it as from more on a customer service standpoint. We want to get them this, or we just want to send them a sample of that. Then that is not about, you can't achieve that goal on a $0 value. You achieve that goal through an Incoterm, and an Incoterm basically designates what party is responsible for cost, insurance, and freight. And that there's many, I think there's currently 13, not 12, maybe 14, I don't know. But the common Incoterms that we hear are XWorks or DDP. So again, there's 13, but that is XWorks puts the least amount of commitment obligation on the seller, and he puts the most. XWorks means I manufacture this, I get it on my dock. You're in charge for everything else, Mr. Buyer. Come pick it up on my dock, and you're paying for export clearance, etc. DDP is the inverse of that. So it's, hey, I'm the seller or buyer. I want to gift you this. I'm going to cover everything all the way to your dock, which is going to include, or to your facility, which is going to include the customs and tariff payment. The scenario, I don't want to take us too sideways, because the scenario you just mentioned is one that I saw with a client, and it raised a whole crazy export related. It's funny because you were like, that keeps the lights on for your company. It's actually import is, we do import, and obviously it's surged a bit in the past weeks, but we're at like export from an export compliance standpoint, like that kind of technology exchange and that scenario is more where you want to watch out as an importer to make sure that technology you're exchanging. So again, this is defined as information for the development and production of your hardware is not export controlled. And I see this a lot with my consumer hardware clients who are working on very cool consumer hardware products. So I think about like a cake and a recipe, like they're making very cool cake, but that cake might be controlled. If you put that cake in a box to export it to France or to China or wherever, it might need a license from the US government because it's considered a risk to our national security to export it without said license. If that is the case, then what that means is that the recipe for that cake is also controlled. So you could be in San Francisco working on this national security controlled cake. You might not even have a cake yet. You might be at a startup. I'm making this very cool cake, and I'm not going to have a cake for 5 years. But if your recipe, the information for the development production of that product is considered a threat to it's considered controlled for national security purposes or nuclear non-proliferation or whatever, chem bio. What that means is even if you sit in San Francisco, you might have a national from Taiwan or from France who is sitting with you in San Francisco. It's deemed to be an export to exchange that recipe with a national of that country, because you're basically like giving that country your recipe. So to bring it back to that example, this is where in practice, I always say, like when I speak on panels, and people who have heard me speak have heard me talk about cake and recipes many times, but there's no import without export. And I recognize like the current pain is on the import, but on that big, it's all cake, right? It's like, how much is my cake going to cost me? And that's the pressing matter. But you can't ignore your export, and especially in consumer hardware with that deemed export risk, because we're seeing a lot of scenarios pop up where clients are coming to us and they're like, oh my God, you're like, I'm at 180% duties. And we're like, oh my God, guess what else? You also are controlled for national security, and you've been sending your recipes all around without a license. And now you have a violation under the Department of Commerce or.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So that's why I'm always like, when I'm in front of engineers and in front of audiences like this, I'm always like, I'd be remiss to not make a plug for the export, the technology piece of it.
Yeah,
And that's not
totally.
you mentioned. I've had a scenario where we're looking at apportioning the assist. We're like, oh, what is the technology? And we're like, oh, that's interesting. Like that means an export license.
Yeah.
for what it's worth, I took it completely sideways. But
No, that everything you say is just so important and has so much relevance to this topic. As we slowly wrap up the episode, I want to do our regular segment, which is called Hardware Horror Stories, which I'm sure that you've seen a lot of. Hopefully not a lot, but I feel like you've been at this for so long. I'm sure you have some fun stories to tell so that people can learn from others' mistakes. And that's like the whole point of it. So tell us has there ever been like a customs related surprise, a component getting stuck at port? I don't know, like something that maybe someone else could overlook and it could happen to them, and maybe this will help them avoid it.
yeah, and you want it on hardware specifically? Because I've got a lot of fun stories. That's more the consumer retail environment. So specifically to hardware, just in the light of the first Section 301 tariffs, just lots of clients we've had a few clients who came to us after fully moving their supply chains to Mexico and getting caught at the border. And so that's that one where I'm like, that USMCA and country of origin headache, that was a huge one. And it's devastating, right? Not only have you just moved your supply chain, because this was like, let me think, the first was probably in the pandemic, so 2020. And we get clients like this who call us, they're like, this is at the border and it's Canada origin. Why are they telling me it's China? And then we have to go back and undo like years worth of a redone supply chain. So that hurts my heart for these clients big time. And I think that is just a really big one. We also see clients who just like hastily pick tariff codes and an exit search tool, just get caught at the border. And when I say caught at the border, Customs has databases in a system. There's a centralized interface where all of these importations go through. And because I feel like a lot of engineers just are like picturing like a customs agent like at the port with a clipboard, and that does happen. But in reality, most of the inquiries are driven systemically because Customs has a lot of just algorithms running in the background. So pairings on. And this goes back to the fundamentals, like making sure commercial invoices are up to snuff, because certain items, and I have a hardware client, they make a very high-tech device that is very lightweight. And so they always get flagged, and Customs is always like, why is the value so high for this tariff code? It's like the combination doesn't really work for them. So in this case, it's totally, when we explain it and provide the context, and now we've had this held enough times that it is fine. But we've had other scenarios where certain things are thrown on just not having that commercial invoice buttoned up. So Customs, if they come to you, we'll send you an email, and it's going to be a CF-28, which is a request for information. You get about 30 days to respond to it, or they'll send a CF-29, which is a notice of action, which is, this is wrong. We're charging you the 25%. Your product is not country of origin Mexico. It's from China. So we've had stuff like that where my clients, I got this letter from Customs. I'm like, that's a CF-29, man. And you've got 20 days to respond, or you're back paying $2 million worth of stuff. So but it's commercial invoices, just making sure you look at your trade compliance foundationally, like tariff codes, country of origin, substantiate, document everything. The record keeping on the import side is 5 years. For exports, now it's OFAC. If you're shipping things out, it's 10 years. So just keep everything 10 years. But yeah, I don't know if those were scary enough.
Oh, it's certainly.
Tell my third client that, because then it's a really fun story.
Yeah, go for it.
It's a client, a food situation where it was a box of food that you find in the center area of your grocery store, and it got caught at the border with, instead of the cookies that are supposed to be in the packs, it was just packs and packs of drugs. So at a very large truck level amounts.
Oh my God. How?
They had it studied in movies. So it was through distributor channels. So it wasn't a direct manufacturer. They were buying it from a third party company. There's a distributor involved in the middle. And we actually, from our standpoint as a consultant, we had to step out of that equation and still under investigation with the government. So.
Oh, goodness gracious. Oh, God. I mean, like the two that I've heard are like so innocent compared to these. It's one is someone they like went to China, they bought these equipment and it's because they were cheap and then they got hit it's recent. They got hit with tariffs. They hadn't put anything on the water yet. So it ended up being like 50% more than the cost they were willing to pay like another maker in Europe. So they were just like, we literally went with this because it was cheaper and like it's no longer cheaper. It's just like totally a waste. That was unfortunate. I'm going to do our lightning round, move all your production to Mexico. I feel like we already talked about this, like a go, no go. And a lot of this is probably going to be an it depends situation. But yeah, I guess move all your production to Mexico. Go, no go.
Yeah. It's talk no before you go.
No before you go.
I love that. Okay.
Oh, wait, that should be my like middle ground. I love that. No before you go. Hell yeah. I love that. Using HTS code reclassification to legally reduce tariffs by changing product documentation.
The first has to go, the back has to no. HTS code reclassification is a go to lower your tariff impact. Again, if you can stand behind it, very natural and acceptable part of what we do. That's perfectly accepted practice to reclassify tariff engineering, right? We talked about that. Changing product documentation, don't like doctor your, don't cut your book, but change your product documentation. If you're going to reclassify, just make sure everything is changed. But if the nature of that question was cook your invoice up a little bit, don't. If it's not, it's go sniff test. If it smells weird, it feels weird,
don't do it.
My kids, just like tricky people. If it feels tricky, it's probably tricky.
Yeah, so true. And then one last one I'll ask is scenario analysis. In this kind of situation that we're in where things change daily, is it worth it to do scenario analysis or is it just like better to be reactive?
Oh my gosh, no, you should have been doing your scenario analysis. I feel like you said you saw me on the instrumentals. We've had 3 rounds of that. And I feel like I've always been my old team, I used to manage a global team and they called me like the tariff queen, or it's not tariff, my tracker queen. Oh my God, not the tariff queen. It was mostly export, but I build trackers and model. Like I love them. Like they're so helpful to an organization because I had one client, oh my gosh, when the first round of tariffs hit, the fentanyl tariffs, we'll call them, they were like, you know what? Like we were able to like calmly execute Operation Zebra or whatever it was. Like we had, but we had one, and even we were modeling before the election. We were like, there were considerations had the election not resulted in the outcome that it did, where that would have been serious implications also. So we were running models on scenarios that would have resulted out that we were forecasting out of like from a trade compliance standpoint, out of a Harris administration, we were modeling potential outcomes out of a Trump administration. Like my clients have to plan. So and we didn't get every single scenario, but for the most part, we had been able to prep and understand the safe word. It was okay when we hit this number or we are at this threshold, we're out or we are freezing or whatever it was. Like my clients had data and models to look for. So obviously lots of new clients who are in this reactive mode right now. So I don't want to say shoulda, coulda, woulda, but also you should always be thinking about, again, back to the one basket, running some scenarios on diversifying and just informing yourself. You are run a model on assuming your product substantially transforms, and run a model on, okay, we'll make the call that it does because it's subjective. What if we do get hit with the tariffs? What's that going to look like? How do we work with finance to accrue for that potential? What does that appetite look like? Stuff like that.
Totally. I'm all for that. And I completely agree with you. Okay, with that, I will ask for some last words of wisdom. I feel like you already gave a ton, but I still want to give you an encouragement for listeners who are working in hardware in this slightly confusing time, let's say, for some. And just anything that you'd want to say to our listeners.
Oh man, I don't want to be cliche, but just keep calm, man.
Hang in there.
Hang in there. These are tangible things you can do, right? So that you're not reacting. There's action you can still do now. So again, know your tariff code, make sure you're up to speed with the basics of import and export compliance. If you actually have a tangible product, if you don't have a tangible product yet, make sure you know that technology position. if you're thinking of reshoring, like the know before you go, just make sure that's going to be supported by some precedents. Yeah, just model it, document it. And if you're in charge of doing all this, make sure your executive knows so you can get a raise when your company lists its hiring and money because it's a lot. It's a lot to add to people's plates that weren't doing this already. It's a lot for us. And I'm in industry and I've been doing this over 20 years. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, hang in there, hang in there. And as you said, chill out.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. This was so useful. And it's just so much. This is how I felt after the instrumental, I think, conversation. I was just like, the knowledge per minute was so dense. I remember just like my fingers falling off trying to take notes. So I really appreciate your thoughts and insight. And I think our listeners are going to get so much value out of it, like completely regardless of what administration, like what situation they're in. These are things that people should just know about and consider and think of, no matter like what country they're in and what governs them, because export and import, that's true for everywhere. And we have a pretty global listener base. So it might be easy to cast it off as, oh, like this is a US problem. No, if you're like selling to the US, you should know what your like clients are going to be thinking about and everything. So thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough.
We're a global company. And again, this is all under the framework of global organizations. So we see the same issues a little less chaotically in Asia and EU and Middle East. So yeah, it's a lot. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And yeah, I hope it was helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.